You're listening to a CNA podcast. September 7th is a day many in Hong Kong will not forget. It was the day 158 millimeters of rain fell in just 1 hour, the highest hourly rainfall ever recorded. The city's most severe rainstorm alert was activated for an incredible 16 hours. By the end of it, streets became rivers and boulders the size of cars blocked main roads. Some say the Hong Kong floods are a clarion call to action. While many in the region were inside sheltering from the rain, Hong Kong correspondent Deborah Wong was right in the middle of it. She joins me to talk about what it was like working in the deluge and how prepared the city is for future bouts of extreme weather. Hey Deb, good to see you.
Hi Teresa, good to be here.
Let's start with the moment you received the black rainstorm warning on your phone. Was it a text message? What went through your head?
Well, it was actually an alert by the Hong Kong Observatory. So we received this alert at about 11 p.m. that night. And what it says is the black rainstorm warning is basically going to lead to seriously flooded roads and inclement weather conditions. So it's advising people to seek shelter in a safe place and to basically stay away from water courses. Schools will be suspended when the black rainstorm is in effect. So what the black rainstorm means is that rain is expected to fall across Hong Kong in an hour. And this is actually the highest level of rainstorm alert, the first being amber and then the second being the red rainstorm. So the black rainstorm is actually issued for the first time in 2 years. So we didn't really know what to expect, and I didn't take it quite seriously until I looked out my window and I realized that I can't even see the building across my house. And that has never really happened, not even during Typhoon Sala. So the reports started coming in shortly after 11 p.m. Videos on social media started flowing in as well. And it was quite crazy to see that the streets, in fact, at Wan Chai and even at the eastern district of Chai Wan, they're all turned into rivers of muddy water. So it was really quite intense.
It was nothing you'd experienced before?
It was not something I've experienced before because the black rainstorm was issued for the first time in 2 years. And, I've only arrived in Hong Kong sometime last year. So this was something completely unexpected to experience.
One thing about being a journalist is you can get thrown any story and you'd have to deal with the weather of that day. But this time the weather was the story for you. How did you prepare to step outside?
Well, we went out very early the next morning on Friday. The black rainstorm was still in force and it was going to be in force for about 16 hours eventually. So I had left my hiking boots out on my balcony to dry because I wore them for the reporting during Typhoon Sala just a week ago, and they were still they were still sunning, right? And when I left it out to dry, I did not expect them to be soaked again by the black rain. So I just tossed on another pair of sturdy sneakers. I got my rain jacket together and an umbrella, which turned out to be completely useless because the winds were still quite strong. My bag had a rain cover, which I just used it to protect the gear inside, zip-locked most of my items in the bag. We are a two-man team. I went out with my cameraman, who's also living on the same side of the island as I was. So it was just down to two of us. And because we were a two-man team, we had to travel light. We couldn't even bring our tripod out because we didn't know how bad the conditions would turn out to be, and we were anticipating actually hiking for a short distance to get to where we needed to go. So we wrapped up our camera in a very large plastic covering, and we also brought our GoPro along for extreme weather conditions.
Yeah, and I saw in your TV report, you even put your microphone in a plastic bag to keep it dry, right? It's so simple, but it works.
Yeah, it works. It was actually my cameraman's idea because we really needed to protect our equipment. We had to waterproof everything for safety. The rain was still there. It was light, but it was still relentless, and we didn't use an umbrella. We couldn't because for TV reporting, if I were to use an umbrella, you can't see the footage that viewers need to see.
Now, that black alert, it was issued about an hour before the record 158 millimeters of rain pounded the city. Deb, did you feel like that warning came too late?
Yeah, so I think the warnings came a little bit too late because it was pretty unexpected as to how fast the situation escalated. we got a couple of messages throughout the night. So at about 9:30 p.m., there was an amber rainstorm warning signal. And within 20 minutes, it got upgraded to the second tier, which was the red rainstorm. And within an hour of that, we received the black rainstorm alert. So it was a very quick process as to how things spun out of control. And it was Thursday night when we started receiving the alert. So people were still out and about or going home. Nobody really expected to be soaked thoroughly, or in some cases, half submerged in muddy water or caught in their vehicles. Some people, it turns out, couldn't even make their way back home. They had to spend the night in the cars because they were completely submerged, or the road conditions were so severe they couldn't even continue driving home. And there was a lot of unhappiness surrounding the lack of the mobile emergency alert, which we must remember actually cost Hong Kong about 19 million US dollars to develop. So the first time that alert was used was last March. It was used during the height of the fifth COVID wave. And I remember receiving the alert, and collectively on the streets, everyone was so shocked because there was this loud blaring sound. And we all thought for a moment that, oh, is there an air raid going on? What's exactly happening? And turns out it was actually an announcement that a public hospital was going to be converted into a designated COVID hospital. So this time, no such alert was issued, although people believe that it should have been because the storm came quite late at night at about 11 p.m. and some residents in flood risk areas were already asleep. So by receiving the alert, they could have been informed earlier and evacuated to higher ground earlier as well.
The images coming out of Hong Kong of the rain, of the floods, really made my jaw drop. You would see cars completely submerged, shopping mall basements underwater, streets turned into rivers. Familiar places for many people almost unrecognizable. For you, what was it like walking the streets after so much rain had fallen?
Well, I think one of the videos that really shocked me was of a muddy river flowing through Wan Chai. That's a mostly commercial area on Hong Kong Island. It's also where our office building is. So people were really turning road barricades into makeshift rafts, and that was quite shocking to see. Buses were stuck in commute. We didn't know if we could get to office on time the next morning to retrieve our gear for whatever reporting we had to do. But we made our way to office nonetheless. Thankfully, the trains were still running. Inside the train station at the Wan Chai area was dry. Outside, however, was quite a different story. The water, even though it had subsided, but there was debris everywhere. There was rubbish strewn all across the streets, lots of mud piled up along the sides of the roads, and the flood barrier leading to our office building was still up, and the dryers in the office lobby, they would all turn on at full blast. And I could see while stepping in, mud lines tracked up all the way to about knee high, I suppose, of the walls, and there were still water tracks on the floor. So it did appear that the building was flooded at some point the night before. We decided in the end to make our way to the Eastern District in Hong Kong Island. Now that district is called Shao Kei Wan. It's quite near Chai Wan, where heavy floods were reported. We knew that there was a landslide there blocking the road, so we wanted to go there to check out the situation. And when we were there, the roads were already sealed off, but we managed to get as near as we could. A bus stop was nearly demolished because you could see debris actually covering the signpost where the bus stop numbers are listed. I understood that some cars were damaged, but thankfully that there were no injuries. So we spoke to a couple of residents. We asked them how they felt about the situation, whether or not they were afraid for their safety, because their housing is very near a slope where it just runs adjacent to the main road that residents normally take to get to work. So this is what they had to say.
Actually, we were quite lucky. Not many cars were parked near the slope and no buses were passing through at that moment. The landslide was so extensive, it would have buried any buses.
I'm worried because the storm was quite intense. Residents going to school or to work could have gotten hurt. If the debris had fallen on a nearby building, it would be dangerous.
So that happened on Friday. We spoke to them on Friday. And on the next day, on Saturday, 2 days after the flood, we went to Kowloon to suss out the situation because the neighborhood in Kowloon called Wong Tai Sin district it was one of the worst hit districts of the floods. We saw videos on Thursday of how a mall in Wong Tai Sin was completely, well, its basement floor was completely flooded with water. So when we arrived there 2 days on, flood waters were mostly cleared, but the area was still sealed off. There was an army of cleaners there still pushing water out of the mall. The damages were pretty extensive, and we kind of understood that many of the shops affected were actually restaurants, and we wanted to go talk to people, but they were obviously pretty affected by the damages, so they didn't want to talk to us. And we made our way out of the mall, and we actually saw some staff members counting money on the ground. And the money, I think they were trying to dry it. They were all quite soggy, but very crestfallen sort of expressions, and they just were not in any mood to talk to us. And when we went to the train station nearby, so Wong Tai Sin has a train station just next to the mall, and that train station, videos were also circulating of how staff members are trying to keep the floodwaters out of the train station. They were trying and failing to put up the flood barriers, but water was still coming in, and eventually I think it also reached about chest high.
Wow.
It kind of affected a lot of the electronics within the train stations.
Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Chia, and I'm host of CNA's weekly news podcast, Heart of the Matter. Each week, my job is to ask the questions you have, like why is the COE so high? Why aren't singles dating? Or what's going on with the red-hot property market in Singapore? If you want the views behind the news, then tune in each week as we get to the heart of the matter. We are on the CNA and Me Listen apps and wherever you get your podcasts. Hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode when it drops.
The floods, too, focusing attention on some illegal activity in Hong Kong, unauthorized structures being built by the rich and celebrities in their homes, sometimes on land that doesn't even belong to them. Can you explain this phenomenon, Deb, and how risky it is?
So this non-compliance is an especially dangerous thing because unauthorized structures can affect the stability of the slope. Now, at first, only 3 detached houses in a Tai Tam area, specifically Red Hill Peninsula, where a lot of luxury houses are. We understand that they're owned by the very affluent people as well as some celebrities as well. And that area is in the south of Hong Kong. And that area, it is quite problematic because authorities found that the slope was unstable, and it turns out that 3 houses were actually directly on top of a slope that appeared to have sustained some damages. A couple of days after the floods, John Lee, he's the chief executive of Hong Kong, he revealed that about 30 houses in that area are suspected to have illegal building works, and they're even built on government land. So we've emailed the building department to ask what exactly were the processes that were breached during the construction or the development. How was this even allowed to happen? But we still haven't gotten a reply yet. But it seems, that the problem is more far-reaching than that area. So one NGO, Liber Research Community, that NGO studies land and development issues in Hong Kong. What they did was to compare satellite images and government land, and they found that more than 170 houses are in breach across
Wow.
8 major areas where luxury houses are built. Some properties they found also extended into country parks or coastal areas. So they've called on government to do a more thorough investigation. And the government a couple of days ago did say that for now, it still has to do urgent slope maintenance before dealing with enforcement measures later. But so far, it's pledged to hold homeowners responsible for repair costs.
You talk about slopes, and some people look at Hong Kong and they say it's an absolute recipe for disaster when it comes to landslides because 60% of the terrain in the city is mountainous, and on top of that, it has a very dense population. What are authorities going to do to stabilize slopes now that we've seen just how dangerous they can be after heavy rain?
Well, this storm alone triggered about 110 reports of landslides. And in the case of Shek O, now Shek O is a popular hiking area where people usually recognize as home to the beautiful Dragon's Back Trail. Now, that area has only one road leading to a village of about 2,000 people, and that road was completely destroyed. It cut off access, so residents eventually had to be evacuated by boat. So right now, the Development Bureau officials are kind of racing against time to stabilize the slopes in all affected areas because Even 1 week on from the floods, we have been receiving consistent rain, so there are concerns that the ground will shift even further. The road and highway departments, they've also been clearing obstruction on roads and repairing potholes wherever they might be. The government right now is studying drainage systems, how their capabilities are under extreme weather, and the works, I understand, will be completed next year.
And just a week before that record rainfall, Hong Kong was facing another severe weather system in the form of Typhoon Saola. You talked about wanting to dry your boots from that weather incident. But the response by authorities to Saola was very different, wasn't it, Deb? It didn't face the same sort of criticism.
No, it's actually a far cry from the extensive multi-agency response that authorities took in the lead up to Typhoon Saola just a week before the black rainstorm. Now, back then, officials installed flood barriers, they laid sandbags in low-lying areas, and they also cleared obstruction in drains to mitigate any sort of flooding in the urban sites. But there was an early warning back in Typhoon Saola. People managed to move their cars to higher ground and underground car parks, and employers were also able to disseminate information quickly to their staff that, hey, look, flexi work arrangements will be possible. And construction sites were also told to secure any loose materials as well to prevent them from flying off, cranes flying off the buildings and hitting people below. So Hong Kong emerged from Typhoon Saola relatively unscathed. And it was also because it learned from 2018. Now, 2018 was when Super Typhoon Mangkhut happened. And the city back then had sustained extensive damage during that time. This time round, however, during the Black Storm, there was no such preparation. So authorities came under fire for what was perceived as slow response. Chief Executive John Lee himself also did not lead any of the press conferences that took place on Friday, a day after the floods. He only made his first public appearance hours later on Friday evening at about 5:30 p.m. So when questioned by reporters on why the government had such a difference in response from the typhoon, this is what the Chief Secretary of Administration, Eric Chan, had to say.
So in typhoon, we can make an early prediction, so we can make an early preparation. But for this heavy rain, it was really, really so big that as mentioned by our colleague, it was once in a 500 years. So it's so big and so sudden, and the predictability is so low. So that's why we cannot to act as the former Typhoon Saola, that we can do the announcement very early beforehand.
Climate experts, they are unanimous in saying, look, these typhoons, these record rainfalls, they're going to be more frequent, they're going to be more intense around the world. How prepared is Hong Kong?
This question came up many times during the press conferences over the past week, and authorities say that while extreme weather can be hard to predict, it has vowed to review communication methods and they've committed to do better. So it will first look at how to improve the way they disseminate information and what sort of information to disseminate. And it's also activated what they've called the mobilization protocol for all civil servants. Now that means staff that are not usually on the front lines, for instance, people from the Department of Justice or people from the Immigration and Customs Services, they also have to pitch in to help whenever these sort of situations call for it. So that means more manpower to clear obstruction on roads or to evacuate people. Now, earlier this year, we also did a series on Hong Kong's climate resilience, and we found out that to prevent flooding and to mitigate the effects of storm surges that usually come about during typhoon events, Hong Kong is building more wave walls, flood barriers. It's also widening drains and even linking up reservoirs. But again, these are long-term infrastructure projects, and we saw how the damage was mitigated during Typhoon Saola due to a really good and early communication system. So I think that really should be the benchmark in the short term.
All right. This weather story definitely not going to go away. Always a pleasure speaking to you, Deb. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
The TV version of CNA Correspondent airs on CNA every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Catch up with them anytime on cna.asia. The team behind this episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, and me, Teresa Tang. Until next time.